I think on the relation of revenue and capital, I gave the example of an agrarian example of if you sow a sack of corn in a field, and come harvest time, you get 100 sacks of corn, and then you keep one back to repeat the process, and the other 99 have to somehow be consumed and used up, and not just put back in the field, because then you need more. Well, you need more fields apart from anything else. So, and this is also a little story, I would say, it's my anti-IMF story, that the IMF goes into sustainable cocoa growers and people like this and say, you need to grow, 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 grow. And I say, no, just keep the same orchard, right? And maybe we need to adjust your price, but you don't need to have more and more coffee bushes to stay in business. You need to have enough price to stay in business. So IMF, and you have enough money to pay their interest. The reason they want you to add bushes is so you can pay their interest, so to speak. But really, from a sustainable point of view, you just need to keep the same bushes, and that the revenue stream is enough from this, so it's a pricing issue, and you don't have to add bushes instead of when what you really need is add dollars to your prices. So this kind of image for me is an image of revenue and capital. For 100 invested, for one sack invested, I get a return of 100. I'm calling it return, but I'm not saying that's a particularly important ratio. But I put in one sack, I get 100. So then to repeat that process, I just put one more, and I've got 99 to sell. So this for me is a husbandry type concept. You husband your capital. You don't raid it because you've run out of revenue. It's not growing in the abstract. It's just an amount sufficient that you can run your operation on this, and you don't then dip into it. You don't add a tree or take a tree out to adjust for the fact that your price on your trees, on your coffee beans or whatever, was not right, if you see what I'm saying. And so if we have that image in all conventional economics or all non-modern economics, this is kind of obvious. You never sold the family silver. You would never take your tree out to compensate for a year's bad harvest. It just wouldn't even come into your mind. This is a kind of self-centered, selfish, abstract, monetarized economy thing you can think when we get to this stage where no one's on the field anymore, or in factories for most of us. And so we don't see this relationship of revenue to capital. And when I say capital is always smaller than revenue, I mean it in this sense. One sack of corn will give me 100 in the harvest. And now you get the other way around. And now, the revenue is shrinking for everybody. It's shrinking, and you need huge capital sums to do anything. So there's something really unhealthy. And for me, that comes back to this image here. There's obviously some imbalance between capital, which I have on the blue side, and revenue, which is what I earn from buying and selling whatever it is I do. And so we have to find a modern way to overcome this imbalance caused by our selfishness, which is really where it's coming from. And for me, that's the whole point of doing your accounts clearly, your trading accounts, your balance sheet accounts, and being very clear in the closing entries that, in fact, your own economy is in balance. Because you can't so easily do this to the whole world unless you're a big corporation and you have a big impact. You can certainly do it to yourself, and then you have 100% impact. And if everybody was attending to their own balance sheet, the sum would be the world would be stable. So it's not a lot of point trying to sort out anybody else's balance sheet. The best way is through your own. Because when you bring truth into a balance sheet, any neighboring balance sheet is going to have to deal with this. If I change my prices, you're going to have to adjust your prices. Any account that I have, I don't have it in isolation. I could make a drawing saying that my income is your expense, or my income is the world's expense.
Yeah.
And my assets are liabilities in the rest of the world. And now we see it's nice to have a picture like this, but you need the kind of reverse image of the whole world in which you're operating singly. And now if you make a move here, if I sneeze in here, you're going to experience it over here.
Mm.
And I won't, in fact, be able to sneeze. This is the kind of crazy example I've got now. It's hay fever season. If I sneeze here, I'm not going to be able to sneeze here if you can't accommodate my sneezing.
Yeah.
This is reflexive. Even if I have a thought here, you're going to have it there. So if I have a car and I say, I'm not going to, you know, I've got an old Volvo, I'm happy with it. My accountant said, no, you have to depreciate 25%. And I said, well, I did that 10 years ago. He said, well, you need to buy a new one. I said, why? There's nothing wrong with it. I said, yeah, but we have our automobile industry got to keep going, and that relies on everyone writing down 25% every year. How are we going to keep the automobile industry going with this overproduction? He's not saying this, I am. So I get it. Okay, well, you're going to have to figure out why I depreciate according to fact, not according to some support system for the automobile industry. And my Volvo is quite happy as it is. And so I'm not going to buy another one. So, and then he's going to say, oh, yeah, but that's going to bring down everybody's statistical average. And I say, well, not my problem. So, you know, I'm saying this very glibly, but I know quite detailed experience of this. Even if you have someone I had a friend in the Barclays Bank, and his petty cash account was accurate. And he was called in by his boss. You have to falsify your petty cash account because your petty cash account is so honest, it's showing the dishonesty in everybody else's. So we want you to become dishonest. Otherwise, you're throwing a light on our dishonesty because you're dragging down the average petty cash account, and that's not going unnoticed. So I can give you many examples of how we live in a kind of, I don't know if it's a membrane, but a single reality that if I think this, you're going to have to think it also. And really, one shouldn't underestimate this. If you just start cleaning up your own balance sheet in the sense I mean it, the world will have to match it. It has no choice. And so if we just start doing this on our own balance sheets, in the end, the world will stabilize itself, not by any external behavior whatsoever. So, and if then we have this idea, okay, so there has to be a balance between capital and revenue, then you can introduce this idea, which we did talk about earlier on. There has to be some way of knowing the difference between revenue and capital, or as I call it, trading accounts and balance sheet accounts, that they're not the same thing. When I buy an apple, the money's gone and eventually the apple's gone. When I buy a building, forgetting about the fact that the bricks are deteriorating, the building is there at the end of the year, at the end of the next year, and the end of the next year, and I have to revalue it. This never goes away until I close the business and get rid of everything, and then everything's gone. So these are very different in character. And so if you go into this, you can see that they then have to be balanced. And my argument previously was you do this by identifying in your balance sheet any excess capital, any capital in your balance sheet, which is rightly yours, but actually is outside your business. It's the reserves you have in the bank, which you've never touched, as opposed to the capital, which is, you know, the machines that are still running in your factory, whatever it might be, or the cash you have on in use. So you can easily identify in a balance sheet the money that is yours, or the capital which is yours, which is now out in the markets, earning money for you, and so on. And so here's your beginning of your balancing. You can say, okay, well, where is this? You can follow it and say, okay, well, I'm helping out the shop down the road, or you can put it into the markets and not know what's going on. But you could take it out of your local bank or instruct your local bank to put it in your neighbor's business. You know, you could take hold of this direct investment and so on. And so if we have this image, then we can start to see through actual accounting, we can start to make trade arrangements where we move capital where it's needed. It can still be mine. You know, I can lend you my money, still mine, but I can lend it to you as long as you need it. I don't have to yank it back and put you out of business. Or I can change the rate of interest. There's lots of things I can do without ever letting go of my money. So we start to realize that between us, I can say, okay, pay your bill next year. I'll give you 360 days to pay your bill, right? Or 10 days. We can talk about this at any point in time. So all this becomes possible if you have a serious set of accounts, not otherwise, because you need to see the effect on your own balance sheet when you start running your financial operation, which is what you're doing when you're in business. You're also a kind of merchant bank. So So we can do this out of a consciousness between us. And then we will see, okay, so we have to keep this relationship of capital and revenue in balance, whatever that means at any point in time. And then when you start looking to that technically, what does that mean? We have to be very clear that if, I can lend you money, I can help you out with providing you liquidity. It's not your money. It's just you'll experience it as a loan from me and it's due back to me. Or I can give you money. But now I want to deal with the first one. If I give you money, that goes from me as an accounting entity to you as an accounting entity. And that will mean if I write you a check for 10,000, check is an image. If I transfer 10,000 from me to you, on my balance sheet, my capital account will go down 10,000 and my cash will go down 10,000. So the asset and liability go down together. And when that money arrives in your world, your cash and your capital accounts go up by that amount, and now it's yours. But it's left my balance sheet and it's arrived in your balance sheet. It's in the realm of loan money. Money which is invested in you to be creative, right? It's not it's not money for you to spend. It's now in your balance sheet. So first of all, that's a technique. If I want to transfer capital to somebody else, that's what it is. You may call it privately, here, I'm going to give you some money. You're going to call it a donation. But the way a donation is tracked, you just look through the accounts, it's tracked the way I said it. There will be a tax consequence depending on your tax regime, but that doesn't affect the accounting. That the first thing is you make the transfer from this balance sheet to this one, and depending on what these things are, and depending on what the tax regime is, there may or may not be a tax attached to that transaction, but that's secondary.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to see if I want to use what I understand gift money by Steiner, the first thing it does is allows me to balance between capital and revenue. And I can do it, but in this case, by transferring excess capital that I have to you. That's one way. And I can call it a gift, but the gift money is kind of noticing where we've got a surplus and where it really needs to go, other than with me, and not hanging on to it. It's really can we jointly manage the surplus we're constantly creating. Where does this need to be in the economy? Not with me, obviously, because I've lent it out and I've never called it back in again. So, you can see, the terms you put on loans or the CDs or whether it's 3 months, 6 months, all this kind of stuff. It's just an semi-conscious way of together we work with liquidity that we're not ourselves needing. So I see what he means by gift money is this: it's the need to balance the economy, and especially you don't take the excess loan money, the excess capital in the balance sheet, and then lend it like a financial market, because that's never been done in history before. It's crazy. The excess has always been given away in one way or another. You can build cathedrals. Imagine the economics of building cathedrals. They take 100 years. You're never going to see the end result in your lifetime ever. So it's not done for your own glory, your own benefit. It takes forever. It's such a huge, colossal expense because it's an unmonetized economy. You're just feeding hundreds and hundreds of masons for years upon years, right? It's just a huge expense for what, right? For this asset, which you're never going to enjoy. And it's an image of what I think Steiner means by gift money in all economies. As I said at the very beginning, with these little private economies, it's just in the nature of human existence. You create an abundance. Your will forces are more, you have more will forces than you know what to do with, and you have to manage this somehow. And that this will always create a surplus, and it will always want to go away from you. And, it would lead you to trade with others, but this itself always creating a little surplus. When the market clears physically, there'll be a pile of money in the middle. And the question is, who does it belong to? Because everybody's satisfied, the market's cleared. And so it is important to make some kind of image, but now there's this pile of money. It's kind of funny thing to say. It's so ephemeral. to get hold of where does this surplus come from. And he's not at that point, you don't at that point say, oh, excuse me, it's mine, I'm the capitalist, or excuse me, mine, I worked harder than you did. You don't have this discussion. It doesn't belong to anyone because everyone's gone home happy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there if they hadn't. So you have the question, not to whom does it belong or to which sector, but what's the best use of it? And I think in all traditional economies, from a non-selfish point of view, the best thing is to use it that we all benefit from it. So let's build a hospital, or let's pay everybody's school fees, or let's do something where the sun shines equally on everybody. But we're not going to say it's mine. It's ours, and we have to, it sounds idealistic talk, but it's really essential. The surplus requires that kind of distribution. You can say, you can ask them, where do we get the biggest bang for our buck when we use this surplus? But so if you have this image, and then you come to building a cathedral, you could say at that time, they said the best thing we can do with this surplus is build this huge temple to God, with all that meant for them, beyond our lifetimes. No one's going to get clever out of this or rich or anything. They're not even going to see the end result. So you won't ever be able to stand back and say, well, I built that. That's never going to happen. And if you're a mason, you only did this gargoyle, you didn't do the one around the corner. So, so it's important to have some sense. None of this was done for my own glory. And what I was saying was it's done for the glory of God. And the bookkeepers in those days, all by hand, they had to draw a little icon, top left-hand corner. Then they would write, to the glory of God, I do my books. And then they had to do their books, having given this oath at the top of every page. So it was a very serious thing to consider. You cannot do this if you're a self-centered, selfish individual. You just can't. So when the selfishness comes into human history, with a whole other discussion, all this way of doing things is seen to be savage or quaint or primitive. I don't know, whatever we say about it. We just don't take it seriously. And we certainly don't write funny little drawings, and we certainly don't make oath statements that we're going to have to abide by. No way. So I'm giving this. So when you have that and you come into modern times and the whole world is monetized, how does this take its form? And I think this is what Steiner's pointing to with gift money. Somehow this constantly created surplus has to disappear into something which we all enjoy, and not turn around and say, by the way, you can have me back at 3%, which is kind of what the financial markets do, because that is economic disaster. There's no way it's going to happen. This will not balance the economy. On the contrary, it will just end up a ballooning amount of capital going around the world, connected to nothing, while nobody has any food to eat. This is pretty much a description of modern economic life worldwide. And it'll just get worse and worse. So his image must be that we have to find some way to transfer excess capital so it comes back into, not, it's excess on my balance sheet, but I've got to find a balance sheet which is in short supply of capital. And it may be that it needs capital in order to build a building. It may be it needs capital in order to pay teachers higher wages. And then it's not going to be a loan, it's something else. But if we're sort of clear about this, the so-called donations are doing this, whether we understand this or not. And gift money, in my view, is not synonymous with a donation. If you want to find a kind of language, it's more a transfer of excess capital from my balance sheet to yours. And I'm saying all this on a very specific condition, that when the income and expense accounts are closed, the difference, the so-called profit, is transferred to the own capital account on the balance sheet. All the trading accounts are then closed, and now this is an addition of my capital in my business. But I'm saying this on the assumption that in your expense account, what you call rent, interest, and salaries or wages or whatever you call them, remuneration, the way you compensated land, capital, and labor, I'm assuming you weren't thinking they were commodities. And the very limit I'm thinking, the very minimum I'm thinking is however much rent you paid or interest or remuneration, the recipients of those amounts of money were happy, and they weren't underfinanced by you pushing down the rent, pushing down the interest, or pushing down the remuneration. meaning this profit we have left over is really yours to put on your balance sheet. It's not theirs, because there's a lot of profit goes on the balance sheet but doesn't belong there because you've underpaid people, you've damaged the environment, all sorts of things we can go into. So I'm just making a one-stop shop. I'm assuming the entire expense account is totally clean. Nobody is undercompensated, and you haven't pushed onto someone else's balance sheet your problems. This is the whole big story. And then what's left over, because that's the difference in modern terms between a financial profit and a social profit. And I'm saying there should be no distinction. Your financial profit should be your social profit. It means that you've not, when you expended, when you bought stuff, you didn't underpay and drive everybody else into problems. You didn't export on other people's balance sheet your problems. So I'm assuming that when what's left over comes on the balance sheet, and I still have a problem because I only need so much for my business, the rest is not necessary. And so every business is also a financial institution at the same time, and now it takes part in the balancing operation.